All right, great to see everyone. Welcome back to the Working Man's Kollel. We are, Jack, on which chapter? We are in the 17th chapter, right? Finishing the 17th chapter. Next week, we will be on the 18th chapter. Give everyone some time over Shabbos during the week to catch up. I think we still have a couple of Mishnayos in the 16th chapter to do. Finish the 17th, and then on Monday, you guys can start the 18th chapter. But I wanted to today pick off where we left off last week. Last week, we used we used the opportunity to give a framework to the laws of Muktzeh, to the laws of what one is allowed to carry on Shabbos and not allowed to carry on Shabbos. Now, when we say carry, we don't mean the malacha of carrying. We don't mean the prohibition of moving something from one domain to another domain or within the public domain more than 4 amos. What we mean is even inside your house, moving something small could potentially be prohibited depending on what the item is. And we spoke about last week that there are about 3 areas of Muktzeh that expand to, about 5 areas of Muktzeh. And then in addition to that, there is the last area of Muktzeh, which is Kli Shemach L'Isser, which is really its own category, its own prohibition. In fact, the Sam Sofer says that there are really that you have to treat it as a completely separate category of Muktzeh. That there is of prohibition. There's Muktzeh and there's Kli Shemach L'Isser, and those are two completely separate things. Today, what I want to do is I want to go through a few very interesting shilas that come up in Hilchos Muktzeh related to what you can and cannot move on Shabbos, and we're going to develop each of the questions that arise. The first question that I'd like to discuss is really starts with a Gemara in Maseches Shabbos in actually the 23rd chapter. It's a Mishnah in the 23rd chapter and then a Gemara in the 23rd chapter. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to learn this Gemara together. The Mishnah says the following. You can see my screen, right? Yeah? Okay, good. The Mishnah says, Ein ma'atzmin es hamis b'Shabbos. Let's say someone, Rahman al-Islam, God forbid, passes away on Shabbos. We know this past Shabbos, Rahman al-Islam, we lost 2 Gedol Yisrael, one on Erev Shabbos and one on Shabbos itself. Rav David Feinstein and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zachronim Levracha. So if someone passes away on Shabbos, so in fact the Mishnah makes it very clear that the body is Muktzeh. Now, why is it Muktzeh? Because we defined the a body. We defined Muktzeh as something that was not set aside to have any purpose on Shabbos, meaning that there's nothing you could do with the mace on Shabbos. You can't bury the mace, and you can't use it for anything on Shabbos, and therefore, it's strange to say, but a body is Muktzeh on Shabbos. So the Mishnah says that not only is the body Muktzeh on Shabbos, but because it's Muktzeh, ein ma'atzmin es hamis b'Shabbos, that one is not allowed to close the eyes of the corpse on Shabbos. The minhag is that when a person passes away, and if their eyes are open, so the minhag is to close the eyes of the mace. The minhag in Yerushalayim, the Gesher HaChaim says, is to wait about 20 minutes to close the eyes of the mace, which we'll discuss why in a minute, but I don't know if that's the minhag here. Basically, it's just, as soon as the doctors pronounce the person as being deceased, so there is a custom to close the eyes of the mace. So one is not allowed to do that on Shabbos. V'lo b'chol, and not even during the weekday, im yetzias hanefesh, at the same time that the person passes away. Meaning don't jump on the mace right away to close their eyes. Why? So the Mishnah continues and it says, if one does that they try and close the eyes too quickly, right at when the soul departs, so then Haris is Shofech Damim, then you are deemed a murderer. The reason for that is because Rashi says that b'torach mua, that any little bit of tension you give to the body, makriv misaso, can hasten the death, and therefore it would be prohibited to do. So that's why the minhag in Yerushalayim is something like waiting 20 minutes or a half hour, something like that. Here, once the doctors pronounce the person as being deceased, that's already beyond the point when we have to be concerned anymore. But this is very critical, just in terms of when a person is in their last moments. We instruct people really not even to touch the body unless there's something on the body that is either hastening the death that you could remove. But if there is the body is just going through its process, so that you don't want to touch the body in case you do something that may hasten the death. But getting back to Hilchos Shabbos, so why is it that we are not allowed to close the eyes of the corpse on Shabbos? So Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, that one who closes the eyes of someone who passes away, they are deemed a murderer. It is like the metaphor. It's like a nair that is extinguishing. And then a person touches their finger on the fire. Miad kafsa. It immediately goes out. Okay, fine. But why is it that one is not allowed to close the eyes of the mace on Shabbos, though? Let's say even, it's been an hour after the person passes away. Why not? So the Ran on this Gemara, the Ran is a commentary on the Rif. Rabbeinu Nissim is a 14th century Rishon, Sephardic Rishon, who has a commentary on the Rif's Piskei Halacha on the Gemara. The Rif was Rabbeinu Alfasi, early 11th century Rishon that condensed the entire Talmud into practical halachic teachings that apply today. So the Ran expands on the Rif, both giving an explanation to the halachos and also bringing in other Rishonim, the Baliyat Tosfos and other Sephardic Rishonim. Anyway, so the Ran explains that. He says the reason why you can't move the eyelids to close the mace is because it's tiltul muktzeh. It's moving muktzeh. So what you see from the Ran, and it's clear from many different Gemaras, including this Mishnah, is that the only problem with muktzeh is not touching muktzeh. Meaning, there'd be no problem touching a mace on Shabbos. Here, you are moving the eyes, right? Moving the eyes is moving something that is muktzeh. Muktzeh is only prohibited if you are moving it, not just simply touching it. So like, for example, there technically wouldn't be nothing prohibited with touching a car on Shabbos. Trying to move a car on Shabbos, I'm not even saying turning it on, God forbid. I'm saying even just simply picking up the car or moving it or whatever it might be. You have, I'm a pretty strong guy, right? You pick up a car and you move a car, no problem, but that would be a problem on Shabbos. But touching a car, not an issue. However, let's say you're walking down the street and you are passing the eucalyptus trees on your right-hand side as you're walking down La Jolla Scenic, and you want to rub your hand along the eucalyptus trees like my kids like to do. So running your hand through the eucalyptus trees is a problem. Why? Because you're moving something that's muktzeh. But touching the tree potentially wouldn't be an issue because you're not going to move the tree. So that is the prohibition of, generally speaking, in the most general terms, muktzeh, the prohibition, despite what the category is, whether or not it's Klisha Machla Isser or it's Muktzeh Machlas Gufo, or all the categories we discussed last week, Muktzeh Machlas Isser and the like, the prohibition only exists if you are going to move it, not if you're simply going to touch it. And in fact, the Ramah brings this down accordingly. Says the Ramah the following. after the Rambam discusses all of the laws, after the Shulchan Aruch quoting from the Rishonim, quoting from the Rambam, and quoting from all the Gemaras, brings down all these halachos of Muktzeh we discussed last week. Says the Rama, Kol Muktzeh eno aser ela betiltul, that Muktzeh is only prohibited if you're actually going to move it. Aval, however, b'negia ba'alma, simply touching Muktzeh, eno menado shari, and it's not going to move, then it would be permitted. Then the Rama says one of the most famous lines in all of Hilchos Shabbos. He says, "V'lachein," and therefore, muter liga b'menorah shebebeis hakneses, that in many shuls they have a menorah, they have a lamp that sits by where the chazan davens from. You see this a lot in Hasidic shuls, definitely in shuls in Yerushalayim, that sitting at the amud, on top of the amud, is a menorah that during the week candles are lit before davening. So says the Ramah, there would be nothing wrong with touching the lamp, touching the menorah on Shabbos. Why? Because you're not moving it. It's only a prohibition for moving Muktzeh. That's what the Ramah says. There'd be nothing wrong with touching the menorah in the basic Genesis on Shabbos, nearest dolkos halav, or betanur, shedolik bo eish, even an oven that is on, there'd be nothing wrong with touching an oven. V'chein motor likach davar heter hamunach al davar muktzah. Okay. He goes into some more halachos of muktzah. But
Can I ask a question here? The Ramah was 16th century, so that was before electric lights. So I assume that the candles were there to see, for light for the cousin.
Correct. There is though a minhag even today though for the Hasidim, that they have actual candles lit when they daven, even in a room where there are many lights.
So wouldn't we today put a lamp on the Amud?
Yes, a lot of people put a lamp on the Amud, but there would be nothing wrong with touching the Amud in such a scenario, because there is it's just touching Muktzeh, it's not moving Muktzeh. So what makes this Ramah so famous? What makes this Ramah so famous was not necessarily the Olam HaTorah, but it was the conservative movement. Conservative movement, or I think it was maybe even the Reform movement, made this Ramah famous. Why? Because even the Shul has a copy of a few of these books. That the early parts of the movement, of the Reform movement and the conservative movement, they were basing their the changes they were making on quote unquote halacha, meaning they felt the need to prove using rabbinic literature, why one would be allowed to drive to shul on Shabbos. Okay, obviously it's skewing rabbinic literature and defacing rabbinic literature, but that's what they did. In fact, there are volumes of tshuvas, of responsa that came from the conservative and reform movement defending their practices. So there is a tshuva about having an organ playing in a shul on Shabbos. Are you allowed to have musical instruments being played in a shul on Shabbos? So the reform movement wanted to argue that in a shul it's perfectly okay. At home it would be a problem. Why? Why is it okay to have an organ in shul on Shabbos? So they said because the Ramah said that there's nothing wrong with touching the menorah on Shabbos, the menorah that's in the shul on Shabbos. Why is there no problem with touching menorah on shul on Shabbos? Because the Gemara has ein shvus b'mikdash, that there is no rabbinic prohibitions in the mikdash, in the base hamikdash on Shabbos. That only biblical prohibitions apply to to a shul on to the temple on Shabbos, not biblical prohibitions. I'm sorry, biblical prohibitions apply, not rabbinic prohibitions. And since the Gemara Megillah tells us that a shul is like a base bate mikdash ma'at, it's a mikdash ma'at, bate knesses to bate midrash shebavel, or like a mikdash ma'at, they're like a miniature microcosm of the Beis Hamikdash, is a shul or a Beis Hamedrash. So therefore, rabbinic prohibitions do not apply inside of a shul. And not only that, but you see the Ramah applies it himself, because he says there's nothing wrong with touching the menorah on Shabbos, meaning there's no muktzeh inside of a shul on Shabbos. Proven their case. So obviously they didn't read the first part of the Ramah and the context in which the Ramah is coming from, and the fact that the Ramah says it's because you're only touching it and not moving it. But anyway, that's what makes this Ramah so famous. So right away, we're already learning an important halacha that applies in every aspect of muktzeh, which is muktzeh is only prohibited if you are actually moving it, not just simply touching it. Okay. Next question I want to get to is the OU about, I want to say it was about 6 or 7 years ago. They had a dispute break out in their base hora, in their office that rabbinic policy and halacha stems from, which was ran in partnership with Rav Schechter and Rabbi Yisrael Belsky. Rabbi Yisrael Belsky was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Torah Vadas. He was one of the major poskim in the United States, and one of the closest friends of Rav Schechter. And Rav Schechter, we know, is the Posek Adar. So the two of them were the senior halachic authorities for the Orthodox Union. And every Friday, Rav Schechter, only now it's just he himself, but Rav Schechter and Rav Belsky would go to the OU every Friday, and there would be questions presented to them, and they'd have to give their psak halacha. So about 6 or 7 years ago, the question was presented to Rav Belsky and Rav Schechter that it was a catering company wanted to rent out a hotel, let's say for a Pesach program or something of the like. But the hotel that they wanted to use, the only way to get into the rooms is through the electric keypad. Okay, so those are they didn't have the Shabbos keys. They didn't have the manual key that you use. They only had the automatic electric keys to get into the room, the key cards, readers. So can the OU give a hechsher to a hotel that only has these kinds of keys? That was the question. So there's a few potential issues over here. Number one, it's how is everyone going to get into the room? So that's not so much an issue. Why is it not such an issue? Because there is nothing wrong with asking a non-Jew to get you into the room on Shabbos for a few reasons. Number one is that at most over here, what we're talking about is a rabbinic prohibition. Amir la'akum does not apply to rabbinic prohibitions. Amir la'akum does not apply to rabbinic prohibitions. Even if you want to say that, meaning Amir la'akum is directing a non-Jew to do work for you on Shabbos. That only applies to biblical prohibitions, not rabbinic prohibitions, if it's for the sake of a mitzvah, which people going to sleep in the rooms is a mitzvah in order to have proper Shabbos and Yantiv. So that's not an issue. And that's even if you want to even say that it would be Amir la'akum. It's probably not even Amir la'akum, they said, because I'm not telling him to break Shabbos in order to get me into my room. I'm saying, I don't have a way of getting into my room. Can you let me into my room? Okay. So that's not a problem. The problem is that the hotel wants, in order to be able to do that, they'll only do it if the person provides their own key. Meaning that to do it at that kind of mass, they're uncomfortable just with the person going around and opening everyone's room. They need a way to, kind of have some sort of an oversight on it. And in order to have the oversight, they'll have their workers use your electric card key, okay? In order to use it for the reader to get into the room. So in order to do that, you have to carry along your key with you the whole time. Meaning, I have to have my card in my pocket, right? The card presumably should be Muktzeh, no? Isn't it Muktzeh? So let's review the categories of Muktzeh again before we get into the Shaila. So the categories of Muktzeh we know, we'll deal with the three big ones, are Muktzeh machmas gufo, something that serves no purpose, right? Sticks, stones, dirt. Okay, so in this scenario, this is not Muktzeh machmas gufo. It doesn't apply in this scenario. Why? Because obviously the key card has a purpose, okay? It's not Muktzeh, it's not Muktzeh machmas chesron kiss, that there's some sort of the owner of the key card is finicky. Not really, because what would happen if they lose their key card? I don't think I've ever stayed in a hotel for more than one night where I actually had to go, where I didn't go over to the front desk and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, can you make me another key?" It happens. People lose their key. This is, you give them your room number, your date of birth or whatever it is, and oh, sure, sir, we'll make you another key. Okay, so that's less of an issue that you're not going to let your kid hold on to the key or something like that. Okay, so then it's not Kli machmas chesron kiss. It's not Muktzeh machmas isser, because there was no isser on it. It wasn't a candle that was burning going into Shabbos and then went out. Okay, so what kind of Muktzeh would it be? It would be that fourth category, that other category, not Muktzeh, but rather Kli shamachtul isser. Its purpose is for isser, right? So it would be like a hammer. A hammer, we learned last week, is something that when used for the right purposes, there'd be nothing wrong with using it. I want to use the hammer to crack open a nut. So therefore, I could move it if it is litzarech gufo or litzarech mekomo. I either need to use the hammer for something that's permitted, like cracking open the nut, or the hammer is in my way. I need to use the hammer sitting on the table. I need to move the hammer in order so I could set the table. Therefore, that would be no problem. So therefore, Rabbi Belsky said that the key card is a Kli shamachtul isser. I'm using it for, its purpose is isser, right? Purpose is isser. And I want to be able to use it for something that is mutter, meaning I'd be asking a non-Jew to use it. Okay, I need to carry it with me in order so I can ask a non-Jew to use it. Okay, so technically speaking, it's kind of like, do we consider the non-Jew using something relating back to me? I can't use it at all. I have no purpose for this on Shabbos, none at all. I can't use it, right? So it does not have any heter that can potentially be used with it. But for the non-Jew, there is heter. There is permissibility in him using it. So can I carry it, because we would call it litzarech gufo? It's for the sake that I need to use it, even if I'm not the one that's using it, but rather it's being used by someone who's allowed to use it. Okay? This is the question on hand. I'll give you just another good example of that. Let's say a paramedic, okay, that needs to have a walkie-talkie on Shabbos, okay? So a walkie-talkie is a Kli shamachto le'isser that he is allowed to use because he needs it. It's litzarech gufo. He's using it for a permissible reason. But for me, I can't use if someone called in we got a code 42, I wouldn't know what to do with that. All right, a code 42, I think that means you're supposed to throw it for a touchdown. I don't know what's a code 42, right? I don't know what to do with that. So therefore, for me, it would be prohibited to carry along the walkie-talkie, but for him, it would be perfectly permissible. So does that mean the walkie-talkie muktzeh for me? Okay, it's a similar kind of question. But this is the machlokas in Rav Belsky and Rav Shechter. Belsky said it is perfectly permissible. Why? Because it is tzarech gufo. I need to carry it for the sake of its usage, even though that usage is going to be done in a permissible way by a non-Jew, I can't use it in a permissible way, only he can. Still, Rebelsky felt that that was Muktzeh, that was a klish machtalis, that you're being used for litzarch gufo, and therefore it's been permitted. Rabbi Shechter felt that it is a prohibition. Shechter felt that the OU would not be able to give a hechsher. I don't know what they ended up doing because they didn't have a third, a shlishi hamachriya b'neihem. So I don't know what the OU ended up doing, but Rav Shechter felt that it was a problem. Why is it a problem? So Rav Shechter likes to point to the opinion of the Rabbeinu Tam, where there is an exception to this rule of kli shemalachto le'isser being permitted to be moved, let's say like the hammer, we were using that as the example before. There's an exception to that rule of it is allowed to be moved if it's for permissible sake or because you need its place. Okay, what would be the exception to that rule? So it really starts with the Ramah in Simin Shin Ches Seif Daled. The Ramah writes in the very next halacha after the one that we saw, Utfilin ein letaltalam. You're not allowed to move tefillin on Shabbos. Why? So tefillin, the reason you're not allowed to move them on Shabbos, namely they're muktzeh, because we don't wear tefillin on Shabbos. Okay? So if we don't wear tefillin on Shabbos, so therefore that would make them a kli shemalachto l'isser. Right? It's prohibited to wear tefillin on Shabbos. So therefore, I can't move them on Shabbos. But it says the Ramakim l'tzarech that if I need to, I would be allowed to move it on Shabbos. Okay. The Mishnah Berurah brings down from the Taz and the Magen Avram that the reason for this is because, as we said, it's a kli shemalachto l'isser, because the Zohar says that it's usher to put tefillin on Shabbos. And therefore, you would only be allowed to move it if it is a litzarch guf or a litzarch mekomo, meaning that the tefillin is sitting on the table and I need to set the table, so therefore I can move the tefillin because it is a kli shemalachto l'isser. It's prohibited to move for just no reason at all, but it's in my way, it's in the place that I need, and therefore I'd be allowed to move it. However, Rav Shechter quotes from the Brisker Rav that the Brisker Rav felt that really we should be machmer for the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam. That Rabbeinu Tam points out in our Masechta on Daf Mem Daled Amud Beis that kli shekol malachto le'isser, that if its only usage is prohibition, meaning a hammer has multiple purposes and can be used in multiple different ways. It can be used to build a house, it can be used to hang a picture on the wall, and it can be used to crack open a nut. A hammer can be used for prohibited things, and it can be used for permissible things. Most of the time you use it for something that's prohibited on Shabbos, but some of the time you use it, Sheila, hello. But some of the time you use it for permissible things like cracking open the nut. However, there are some items that its only use is prohibition. It has no other purpose on Shabbos. Okay? An example I like to use for this is an iPhone. Okay? I think the best example is the iPhone for Rabbeinu Tam. Why? Because what use do I have with this on Shabbos? I'm not going to crack open a nut with it. Okay? What am I going to do with it? The only use it has is prohibition. And therefore, even if it's sitting in my way, even if it's sitting on the table, I wouldn't be allowed to move it. Because it's not a kli shemalachto le'isser. It's worse than a kli shemalachto le'isser. It's a kli shekulo le'isser. A kli shekulo le'isser is like sticks and stones because it has no purpose on Shabbos. And therefore, I can't move it even for its place or even for some sort of crazy permissible idea I can come up with. Okay? So therefore, says Rabbeinu Tam, you wouldn't be allowed to move the iPhone, said the Brisker Rav, being that you are not allowed to, according to the Zohar, and we paskin like the Zohar, that you're not allowed to put tefillin on Shabbos. So what usage does tefillin have on Shabbos? Only a prohibited one. And therefore, even if tefillin is in your way, I've heard this from Schechter before, it would be usher to move the tefillin. You can't move the tefillin. Like, for example, I've asked Rav Schechter in the past, let's say a person, they keep their talis and tefillin in the same bag, okay? And they forgot to take their talis out of their bag before Shabbos. It's kemat impossible to get your talis out without moving your tefillin. That's a problem. You should use the shul's talis in such a scenario. You'd have to leave your talis in the bag. It's almost impossible. So because it's prohibited to move the tefillin. Now, granted, the Mishnah Berurah, the Mishnah Berurah would disagree with Rav Schechter and disagree with the Brisker Rav. This is a machlokes in the Chavetz Chaim and the Brisker Rav. And the Chavetz Chaim was makel about it because it's L'tzarech Gufo or L'tzarech Mekomo. And he's not machmer for Rabbeinu Tam, but the Brisker Rav and Rabbi Soloveitchik and Rav Schechter are machmer. So my Rabbeim are machmer. So I personally try to be machmer about this only because these are my Rabbeim. I have to stay consistent. But for what I would say is for anyone who is a Talmud of the Mishnah Berurah, then it would not be a problem to move your tefillin from the bag. So with this in mind, we can get back to the card key. So Rabbi Schechter felt that the card key is prohibited to carry. Why? Because its only usage is Isser, and therefore it's like sticks and stones. I can't carry it around, even if you want to say that for someone else's usage that is allowed to use it. That would be litzarech gufo or litzarech mekomo, but litzarech gufo, litzarech mekomo doesn't apply to something that I cannot use on Shabbos. That's what Rabbi Schechter wanted to say. So Rabbi Schechter's machmer and Rebelsky was makel about that. Okay, we have time for one more shaila I wanted to get to. Time for one more shaila. Where did it go? Oh, here we go. So an interesting question once came before Rabbi Soloveitchik, that so on some of the old some of the old arks in a shul. So the Aron Kodesh will have actually on the doors itself, when the doors are open, that there will be a fluorescent light. So in our Aron Kodesh, they're on the inside of the Aron Kodesh. But here, what if the lights are actually on the door? Okay, so the lights are prohibited to move. Okay. So if I open the doors to the Aron Kodesh, so the door is moving the lamp, okay? So therefore, would that be prohibited mitam muktzeh? Rabbi Soloveitchik was very machmer when it came to muktzeh, for a separate reason. Rabbi Soloveitchik was machmer when it came to muktzeh because he felt, and this is what I was looking for just now, that when it comes to Hilchos Muktzeh, there is, as we said, there are categories in terms of what is allowed to be moved on Shabbos and what is not allowed to be moved on Shabbos. But Rabbi Soloveitchik said that regardless, even if something is technically allowed to be moved on Shabbos, that doesn't mean you're allowed to just move things on Shabbos. Okay, when something, let's say, even he said, let's say a fork or a spoon that's completely permitted to use on Shabbos, but if you just want to play around with them for no reason, so he felt as though that would be prohibited on Shabbos. Why? Based on the Rambam, that the Rambam felt that at the end of the day, why is it that you're not allowed to move muktzeh on Shabbos? Because you need to be cognizant of the things that you move on Shabbos. You need to be thoughtful about it. You need to have a purpose for why I'm moving this fork, why I'm twisting it around on my finger, right? And therefore, he felt that you should, if it's possible to stay away from getting into the shilas of muktzeh in general, you should be staying away from getting involved in the shilas of muktzeh. So Rabbi Soloveitchik was very machmir about muktzeh. Regarding the shilah about having the lamps on the doors of the Aron Kodesh, there it gets into the shilah of basis l'davar aser, that the muktzeh is on a stage, meaning it is on top of something else, and therefore the muktzeh penetrates over permeates onto the basis that it is on. So the base that it's on becomes muktzeh, but that's only true if the muktzeh item is more desired or more valuable than the item that it is sitting on. So in this scenario, the Aron Kodesh, the doors of the Aron Kodesh are certainly more valuable than the fluorescent lights that are sitting there. Therefore, if you're ever at a shul and they give you psicha and you go up to the Aron Kodesh and you see that, oh my gosh, you open the doors and you see that there are fluorescent lights sitting on the doors themselves, you don't have to go over to the gabbai and say, you have to find someone else to close it because I'm not touching the door anymore, because there's no question that the doors are more valuable than the muktzeh item itself, and therefore it wouldn't become a basis davar aser. You're moving the door, you're not moving the lamp. But these are just a few really fascinating shilas that we encounter with regard to muktzeh. There are many other scenarios that can come up. Children's toys, watches. Muktzeh is a fascinating topic, but I think we really developed a good understanding of the basic principles that apply to muktzeh, to be sensitive to the prohibition, sensitive to the issues. And next week, God willing, we will continue with the 18th chapter on Masechah Shabbos. All right, we'll stop here. I got to hang around for a couple minutes if you guys have any questions.